Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on where you are on this fast-forward planet. This is Andy Revkin, my Sustain Wet webcast. This is a pre-recorded conversation ahead of the release of a new film that is absolutely extraordinary because it centers on the life of one of the most extraordinary climate-focused scientists on the planet. And I say this having interviewed pretty much every climate scientist on the planet, it seems, in 35 years of writing about global warming. Lonnie Thompson is extraordinary, as the film shows, in both his curiosity, his determination, his physical indomitable nature, and his wife, Ellen Mosley-Thompson, his partner, lifelong partner in this effort as well. It's just as much a part of his science and his advocacy for a sustainable relationship with climate as he is. It's great to have you on here, and it's really fantastic to meet the two filmmakers, Alex Rivest and Danny O'Malley, who have created this documentary, which tells the story of your life and struggles and gets across the complexity and challenges that you face, including one of the most amazing moments, your health crisis, which you'll learn about in a minute. So anyway, you're in Peru, I believe, Lonnie, right? In Cusco?
Yeah, I'm in Cusco. We're just finishing up our samples. We'll have that all completed by tomorrow, and then we'll be headed back to the States.
And this is at what year of your life? How old are you now?
75. Yeah, and this is next year will be my 50th year of studying Calcaya. And over that period of time, I've been able to watch the changes taking place, and I'm really astounded. The changes between 2018, when the film crew was here, and what Calcaya looks like today. I mean, it's amazing. And in this part of the world, we're here in Cusco. They have a extreme water shortage right now because of the droughts in this part of the world. And I know their largest reservoir is the lowest it's ever been since they've kept records on it. So there's the water shortage, and of course the glaciers continue to shrink. And that really makes issues for the dry season and during times of drought in this part of the world.
Amazing. So having worked on this question in this place for 50 years, you're well positioned to make an argument for climate change, because climate is usually measured as the average conditions over periods of like 30 or 40 years. So you've literally, in your work, lived through climate change, and your work is about conserving these records in high ice, especially in the tropics, that are going away. I'd like to, before we get into the backstories of the filmmakers, which are almost as fascinating as yours, I want to show the trailer from the film. So it is called Canary, so hopefully this will work. Hold on a second.
In the old days, you took a canary into the mine. If it dies, then it's time for you to flee the mine.
My first encounter with Lonnie, it was like I was meeting a real-life Indiana Jones.
Lonnie was a visionary. He saw our global climate history captured in these glaciers.
Lonnie was going where no scientist had gone before. It seemed to be impossible.
It's too high for human beings.
It's dangerous.
There's no way you're going to drill in this remote part of the world. You're wasting your time. Science can only advance when you do things other people think can't be done.
He was on a mission to find his place in this world.
I had no idea what I was getting into. I had never climbed a mountain. I had no idea what it would take.
This was a huge departure from usual.
There was something wrong. My doctor said, you have one option and one option only, and that is to have a heart transplant. You just keep going.
He was in denial.
I remember watching him struggle to breathe, thinking to myself, and you're not going to survive this.
Having gone through these near-death experiences, my message was to help bring together the world.
This glacier started disappearing before Lonnie's eyes.
He thought he could change something.
If he doesn't do it, nobody would.
Lonnie didn't come to climate change. Climate change came to him.
If humans can create it, humans can solve it. I don't believe there's anything that we cannot achieve.
Absolutely remarkable. Well, there's an achievement in this film. I have just watched it ahead of the release. It's going to be in theaters in a number of places. Maybe Alex, I'm going to introduce Danny and Alex, and then we'll get, I think, looks like Ellen may be ready to come back in too. Ellen Mosley-Thompson, the other part of this dynamic duo, is here from near Ohio State, I guess. You're back home, I assume. In let's see if Ellen's.
Hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah.
Oh, good. I'm sitting in my office at Ohio State University. I'm just here working like I work every day. It's been, it's always more difficult when Lonnie's away because then I have to carry his load here, whatever he would be doing here, and my load, which is right now teaching a course on global climate change to 26 honor students.
It's just great to reconnect with the two of you. And so, as I said, let's talk to the filmmakers. Alex and Danny, maybe Alex first. I'm going to show a slide in a minute with the information on how people can find the movie. But tell us how this came about. It's not like you've spent decades as sort of climate-focused filmmakers. And Alex, you started out in neuroscience. How did you bend the curve toward this arena?
Well, thank you for having us to chat. This is an honor. It's really wonderful to be back on the same screen with Lonnie and Ellen, and Danny. Of course, I talk to that guy all the time. So I did a PhD in postdoc in neuroscience at MIT. I was studying memory systems in mice, but I've always kind of been someone who liked to explore and go places off the map and see, what it looked like just beyond the next ridge. And what I realized when I was doing that is there were always scientists a little bit further than I could ever go. And I was kind of pulled in by this notion that I didn't think that was communicated well, that I'm out here going as far off the map as I can, but there's people who are going further, and it's just their curiosity and their persistence that's getting them there. So I just had this vague notion that if I could just kind of tell kids that their curiosity can bring them to the edges of the planet, that there was something in that. And so I had this seed stuck in my head. I met Danny over shabu shabu in Little Tokyo in Los Angeles. And I told him, I grew up doing science. I've been doing science, but science programming always feels a little bit like homework to me. And it feels like it's missing something. And I told Danny this idea of the scientists that were going beyond where I could go. And he said, well, that's interesting, but what you need is to explain why it's important to them that they're there. So if we can tell audiences and make them feel why it's important that the scientists are in this place at that time, we can do it. At that moment, we teamed up and said, we're going to figure this out. And I quit science. I left the academic track and decided I wanted to change the way the world sees scientists. And Danny and I teamed up. We were starting to develop a TV series, which we reached out to Lonnie about. We got a grant from the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation to basically prove that scientists are interesting, because believe it or not, most people don't think scientists are interesting. And that a lot of that is because the programming is so hands-off, what the real motivations are behind scientists. And we met Lonnie on a Skype call, I think in 2017. And within 5 minutes, he had us pulled into this kind of adventure story. Within 40 minutes, he had Danny and I crying. And when we turned off the Skype, I turned to Danny and I said, if there's a single story we ever tell in this world, it has to be this one. And Lonnie, a couple months later said, I'm going back to Calcutta the glacier that kind of started his career. And Danny and I said, if you'll allow us, we're going to come with you. And so we arranged to go with Lonnie to film at Calcaya back in 2018. And we hadn't raised all the funds by the day we were leaving Cusco to go up the mountain. We signed the last contract to get us up there. And since then, it's just been a wonderful journey. And I think this film can help change the way the world sees science, and also this issue of climate change, because I think we can talk about that a little bit later. But we set out to change the way scientists are seen on screen, and I'm just so proud of what this group has accomplished, especially with Lonnie and Ellen's help and Danny's vision.
Fantastic. So Danny, if anyone in the sort of TV screen streaming arena knows you, it's probably through things like Chef's Table, which is also about bringing people's lives to intentions and the like to screen. But so your brief story of how you got to that table at Shabu Shabu, and then this came about, some brief moments about that.
Yeah, I mean, my background is, I went to film school. I worked in post-production, and it was at a time where unscripted stuff was really taking off. So there was a lot of reality TV and a lot of documentary. And I found myself coming up in that world, working with athletes and rock stars and just filming all this stuff. And when I met Alex, we had this conversation, and I was just like, that's great. People like volcanoes and they're out by volcanoes, but I'm not obsessed with volcanoes. And what you need to show me is how someone who was born, did not have an obsession with volcanoes, got to that place where they're living by a volcano all the time and obsessed with it. And then I will care about volcanoes as much as they do. Right. And we started working on it together. And this was actually a season, the summer before we started Chef's Table. So this journey of trying to elevate science stories is as long as that show, and that show is the longest running show in Netflix history at this point. So it's been a long road, and one reason this movie is really personal to me and Alex is we were told, Lonnie, when he tried to drill Quilcaya, we were told, no, you're not going to get a Chef's Table camera crew up that mountain, scale down your dreams. No one's going to want to tell a science story for a big documentary budget. And we just had it in our minds that no, this is an adventure movie. This is a Spielbergian type life story, and it deserves a proper cinematic treatment. And we held the line there and just figured out how to make it happen. And like Alex said, the day we flew to Peru, we didn't even have the money for the expedition or for filming. But 7 days into the trip, just before we headed to the mountain, we secured the funding to pay for it. Otherwise, we would have been on the hook for a film shoot that I certainly couldn't afford.
Wow.
So it's been this adventure where Alex and I have been kind of living on the edge, pushing the limits of what the film industry will allow, what we're capable of. And, it's funny now, everyone's saying, congratulations, you did this amazing thing, but every step of it felt like constant failure and learning and pushing through. So it's been a really long journey, and I think we've made 4 or 5 seasons of Chef's Table during the time that we worked on this film. So it's a labor of love. I can't even I can't even sum it up. It's just the most important thing in the world to me and Alex.
Well, I'm going to swing back to Lonnie in Cusco, Peru. I've unmuted you, Lonnie, and there's video. The film has video from earlier parts of your life and mountain explorations. It's been pulled together in this chronology that's just so remarkable, starting with your youth in West Virginia and a sixth grade science teacher who was influential, which excited my wife, who saw the screening with me, because she was a sixth grade science teacher for a long time. And you were in coal country, which has some irony, if not just power to it. So can you just describe a little bit about what it feels like to see that arc of your life now envisioned in the film, recreated in the film? Is there anything you learned about yourself?
Well, well, I think yes. Though I give Alex and Danny credit for linking the story together in a way that it shows on the film. But I also, one of the objectives for me was that we could use this story to inspire other young people who are struggling to find their path, and inspire them to be persistent, work hard, find a way to make it happen. Because there will always be people who say that no, you can't do that, and this is that's an impossible dream. But you have to believe, and you really have to believe in yourself and what you can do. So I'm hoping that the film will inspire other young people who are coming from backgrounds where they may not have all the opportunities that others have. You still can find your way. And so when Alex called, and I thought, well, okay, here's a way that maybe we can make an impact. And if we don't, I can always tell my daughter, at least we tried. I don't think I could have found another team that could tell this story better than Alex and Danny. So it all worked out very well, I think.
You're essentially testing another frontier by diving into the communication part.
One of the perspectives that I had of seeing the Quelccaya ice cap for almost 50 years is the change and documenting that change. It's truly amazing in the world. If you talk to the local people, that ice cap is not a physical object. It's a living being that provides water to alpaca and for their local survival. And so to me, the ice cap has a very, very strong story to tell. And as an observer, as a scientist who's documenting this change, it's like a medical doctor who has a terminal cancer patient. And we know why this ice cap is dying, but I can't do anything. I'm trying, but I can't do anything to stop it. So I'm trying to, and I hope the film speaks for the ice. The ice is telling us it has no agenda. It is just responding to all the variables in its environment, and that it's going to disappear. And so I think that that story is an extremely important story to tell.
There's a really beautiful moment in the film where you were doing similar work in Papua New Guinea. And that ice cap to them was seen as the incarnation of living being. And they were concerned about the science extracting something from a very special being. And you had a really wonderful conversation with them that resulted in your being able to still work on that ice cap and extract some of the record of that, the memories of that being. Can you talk about that a little bit too? And then maybe we could get a little more bit from Ellen on some of this too.
Yeah, I would say that, yeah, in New Guinea, but also here in South America, glaciers are considered sacred places by the indigenous people. This is where their ancestors go, or this is where their gods live. And so they're, and it doesn't matter, same if we work a lot in Tibet, these are very special places to indigenous people. So in New Guinea, you know, we always try to go to these places a year before, meet with the communities, talk with them, tell them why we're there, what we're going to do, so they can ask their questions, so that we're all on the same page. And but in New Guinea, there were 4 tribes that live at the base of this mountain, and they're still at war with each other. And so it's, and the communications are very, very difficult. But nonetheless, when we were drilling, one day we were attacked by the Amungme tribe, 150 of them, but they didn't have the crampons, the ability to walk on the ice, and we were drilling up in the clouds, and so they couldn't get up there. But then they were going to break into the freezers into Bangapora, where we had our ice cores stored. And the mining company, Freeport-McMoran, were able to, they had information that this was going to happen. So they moved all the cores to a freezer down on the coast. So when they broke in, there was nothing in there. But then I got this call to come down, but I come down and speak to these people and tell them what we're doing. And I said, sure. And I asked my Indonesian colleagues, I said, let's go down. And they said, no. And so we went down, and they had a conference room. And I mean, this is the wild, wild west in many ways. And they had guards with guns. And and they had an interpreter. And so I start to tell the story. And I figured the best way to communicate would to show them that in places like Peru, the indigenous people helping us carry the cores and working with us. And so I started this, and maybe 20 minutes into this talk, they all stood up, they tore their shirts off, and I looked at the guard, and he said, they always do that before they go to war. And I said, okay. But it was actually intriguing, because in the discussion, I told them that the day would come when this ice cap wouldn't be there. And, you know, they accused us. They said we were stealing their memories. And I said, that's exactly what we're trying to do, to capture those memories before they disappear. But then then I said, this glacier will disappear. And then there was an argument between the elders and the young people in the tribe. And the elders said, no, the glaciers have always been here. They're part of our history. And then the young people were saying, have you seen what's happening to these glaciers? Have you seen how rapidly they're retreating? So there was this internal discussion. And then come to find out, in their religion, the arms and legs of their god are the mountains and the streams. The head of their god is a glacier. And yes, we were drilling into their skull of their god to steal the memories. But after explaining exactly what we were doing, they did give us permission to finish drilling, take our ice cores, and go home. So but I sometimes, when I think back to testify before the U.S. Senate, it was almost the same. You had the elders back in 1992 saying, oh no, climate change, you know, it's always changed. There's always a lot of variability in the system, you know. And then there were younger senators who were saying, no, you see these extremes starting to happen. And this was back in 1992. And here we are in 2023, the extremes are much worse. The warming is so, I mean, you know, you can't listen to the news any day not to see some extreme event on some part of this planet. And So the question is, yeah, how do you take that message and actually bring about change that's going to make this world sustainable for all of us going forward? And we hope this film can get that message out there.
Danny and Alex, when you think of the limits of what filming can do and what you have here, what's your ideal vision going forward? Obviously, a lot of people see it.
I mean, I can take that as someone who my whole life was changed by movies. And I think the way we hope it works is everyone who sees this movie asks themselves what they can do and, go make a difference on climate change, and the whole population eventually sees it and problem solved. But I think that's not really there's a diffuse level where that happens with entertainment, and awareness grows and people look at their own communities, and that's a really exciting possibility. But for me, I think of all the scientists we've talked to, they have a moment where they read National Geographic and then they dedicated their lives to that thing that they saw, and they went to the museum and something sparks for them that ignites that kind of motor and that passion. The way, Lonnie had a science teacher, and next thing you know, he's building a weather station in his family's barn. And to me, the goal of the film is to create a strong emotional connection to the issue, the people who are trying to solve it, and the people who are affected by it. So whatever way it can create a powerful spark in someone, that it helps add to the front of people who are fighting to make a better future, because not one film's going to do it. We need 1,000 stories like Lonnie's. And we just hope that this is one that starts to give people that strong connection and make them realize, oh, this affects me too. And, I have conservative members in my family who saw the movie, didn't really think much about climate change before. And when they saw the scene with the community that lived near the glacier and how they're affected, these are people so far away from my family, but their response to that scene was the first time I thought this might affect me. So it's really about showing people that, it's not about just sea level rise and these abstract things. It's about people and our ability to protect our children and our children's children in the future. And there's only one side of this issue, and it's fighting to make a better future. And that's the way I see it. And I think this film really kind of, one thing in it is like previous films of, do you believe in climate change? Do you not? Here's the facts. Let's try and get you on board. And this film kind of says facts are not what's going to do it. You need to tell the human stories. Science has done its job. And it's up to the rest of us to be like Lonnie and say, we don't know unless we try. We need to go build a better future. There's no perfect answer. There's 1,000s of ones that'll build up and create that future. And the only way to solve the problems with those solutions is to pursue them. And we're all at the beginning of Lonnie's story, heading to Quokaya for the first time. And we don't know what's in store, but we have a dream. And that dream is a better future for all of us.
I want to bring in Ellen to talk about a couple of other aspects of this. Thinking about the dimensions of society, you know, even in your part of Ohio, where I now live in Maine, total red-blue mix. But I can find all around me deep enthusiasm for switching to heat pumps. We put on a heat pump. We just moved here a year and a half ago. We have a heat pump. It's cutting our energy bills. My mother-in-law, who's 91, lives in a tiny lobster village. She's putting in a heat pump, and her family is very conservative, big chunk of it. So how do you think about this, Ellen, in you know, not just the film, but your work as a team with Lonnie and through these decades and where we are now compared to where you were?
Well, it's been a long journey, let's put it that way. And we've come, I think that often change is happening and you're so close to it that you don't see it changing unless you step back and think about it. But I remember 30 years ago when we were already concerned about global climate change and what we were seeing, not just in the ice and the glaciers in the mountains, but the Antarctic and the Greenland ice sheets, starting to see changes there. And Lonnie and I would be asked to go out to give a talk, and then at the end we'd have a Q&A. The questions were pretty rudimentary, and I'm not saying that in a derogatory way, but the general public just really had not become fully cognizant of climate change and all that it involves. And so we did experience what I want to say, some anger and some hostility. I remember Lonnie and I had to speak before, just real quickly, we had to speak before a school board because there was a what I call a climate denier, a very prominent climate denier here in our region, who was trying to get space in the school to have a course to teach the students the real science of climate change, which was not the science at all. It was his science. And so Lonnie and I went before the Board of Education there in that school district and showed them the facts and talked about, you know, climate change really from a scientific perspective. And when it was over, when we were leaving, I was attacked by a person. And fortunately, there was a big man close by, and it wasn't Lonnie, who took the guy and kind of got him off me. But it was a real eye-opener that those facts, the data that we show, that's not going to be enough. And we have to figure out how we can effectively communicate with the people, with the other people who are not scientists. And that's not easy to do for a scientist, but we've spent a lot of time trying to think of like analogies and things like that we can use when we're talking, and most importantly, learning to not talk down. And part of it also is just to become part of their world and talk about our experiences, but more of in the context of what we know those people have experienced. We have agriculture's really big here in Ohio. And early on, the farmers here absolutely denied that there was any climate change. But then you start asking them about, well, you know, what little animals do you see around the pond? Are they the same that your grandfather would have seen? What are you experiencing? And just kind of getting down to the level of just our common interests in our food, our water, the quality thereof, the abundance, etc. And it's amazing how that just opens doors. And they want to talk with you and share coffee. And then because Lonnie and I are from West Virginia, in the southern part of Ohio, we can slip right in to that society essentially and be fully accepted. And once people realize that you're not trying to change them, but you want to work with them for changes that we collectively want to make, it's amazing how much progress you can make.
That's fantastic. I was really interested. The movie has a clip from the moment that Lonnie got the National Medal of Science from George W. Bush. You know, I was writing extensively for the New York Times through that whole stretch. I noted in the video you showed, there's a fleeting image of Anthony Fauci, who you received the award in 2007, although you got them in 2005, I believe. And that says something about what Ellen was talking about, that, you know, Fauci has faced the same acrimony that Ellen described there, still does. And I think that Ellen described the pathway forward, which is through listening, a lot of active listening, through using a film like this as a beginning point, for example, for conversation, not as something necessarily to drive conversation. And Lonnie, this came to mind when you were negotiating with the Papua New Guinea tribes people, because there was a lot of listening there. And I recently did a webcast here on a project in the Arctic where climate scientists were working for 5 years with indigenous people in Kotzebue, Alaska, to design a research project. Now, the scientists weren't just parachuting in and doing their research and maybe holding a town meeting. They were working with elders, the scientists of that village of Kotzebue, the Inupiat scientists, to design their inquiry right from the start. And I think the more of that, the better. Lonnie, I'm going to unmute you briefly to see if you can add some thoughts about the importance of conversation, and then we're going to get back to the movie.
Yeah, I think the being able to communicate with people on their level and because ultimately facts will not change people's opinion. That change has to come from within. And so you have to find the common ground where you things that you do agree on, and then build from there to really have communication take place. One of the things I would say about the time we live in that concerns me is truth. What is truth? And, you know, truth in science, the facts, you know, that's what protects us. You know, if you look at a glacier, to me, it is just nature telling us a truth. It's summing up the radiation, the temperature, the precipitation, all the things that allows it to exist, and it responds to those. It cannot be. It has no political agenda. It cannot be bought out. It will respond to what's going on in its environment. So to me, it's kind of it's a pure truth of what's going on in our environment, and the fact that they're retreating all through here in the Andes, but through the Himalayas and Tibet and around the world, is a very strong message to all of us who live here that our environment in which humans and civilizations have developed is changing, and it's changing very rapidly.
That's right. And here's another clip from the film.
February 18th, looking at this glacier in the crater, you can see that it's wasting very rapidly. It's hard to see how it could last more than 10 years into the future. And out here, there's a strange one all by himself. It's like an iceberg without an ocean. After Huascaran, we started to really get concerned about how rapidly the change was coming. Most glaciers were losing mass. When you realize they're going to disappear.
Wow. Again, this is just a short clip from this extraordinary film, Canary, and it shows you exactly what Lonnie was just talking about. When you look at it across the landscape of the whole planet, then arguments, the counter arguments kind of fade away completely. And I remember you mentioned in passing, these glaciers all around the tropics, particularly are the kind of the true Canaries, because they're so far ahead of things. In 2001, my first, I think I had already quoted you in something I had written earlier. I've been writing about global warming since 1988, but the page one story in the New York Times in 2001 from Kilimanjaro caught a lot of people's attention. And this was before social media and before people were retweeting stuff. And yet it's still, but that was in that era, that was the early stages of that era where Senator Inhofe and others would quickly yell the counter, these kind of counter arguments that weren't really based in science. And we've come a long way since then, particularly because of your science. I still can't believe that you had a heart transplant, which was the subject of my journalism master's thesis in 1982. My Columbia master's thesis was on the future of organ transplantation. And I got to witness in the operating theater a heart transplant. And the idea that you had one and have returned to your mountain environment. I can't remember if it was Ellen or your daughter who was talking about there's some aspects of your obsession that are really remarkable to behold in the film, but you're still going at it, even at your day and age when others might be in their emeritus, lounging period. So again, I'm really glad the film captured that entire pathway. And I don't know whether there's something to say about the value of just perspicacity and what people have to think about.
I have something that to the topic of kind of all the things you just circled around and Lonnie was talking about is there's no other person like Lonnie. There's coral scientists, there's people in Greenland or people in Antarctica that see these impacts. But I think one reason that Lonnie's story is so powerful is not only there's no arguing with a melting glacier, but he, along his narrative, has witnessed that impact on a global scale. So if we're talking about global warming and the facts don't penetrate, you need a human being who's witnessed it all over the planet to get that personal connection to something of that scale. And Lonnie's ambition and his never quitting and always finding the next glacier to get data, that hunger he has, put him in a position where this once in a history event of global warming that is so large and so hard to put in a human scale, that ambition matched the scale of the moment in a way that makes this film a must see, because you just tell Lonnie's story and you see images throughout the whole thing of this stuff adding up. It's backed by the science, who this guy is, and half the movie isn't even about global warming. It's just about his young science adventures at first. And so you see him as this underdog, and then next thing you know, he's bringing you video and evidence of this happening all over the globe. And it makes you let down your guard, and also just provides you with a bunch of stuff that's really hard to argue with. And we're not even arguing it. We're just leaving it there. And if you have cognitive dissonance, it's pretty relentless, because Lonnie's whole back half of his career has been facing that uncomfortable truth.
That's so interesting. So nicely put. You also, the film gets at something that's important, I think, for those looking at their career paths for young people. Lonnie, I've got you back here. One is serendipity. Lonnie, as you say in the film,
yes. Yeah.
I'm going to mute you for a second. Hold on. In the film, you say, you never climbed a mountain, and you really didn't it was basically like, it feels like you didn't want to climb mountains, but you knew that that's where the evidence lay. Other scientists you met, a job you got that was just one of a variety of jobs you might have gotten as a young scientist pulled you in that direction. Can you talk about serendipity? And I know, by the way, everybody, if you got to end this shortly, we can. If not, we can go a little longer. But so let's talk about serendipity, and because a lot of young people, I think, right now are very worried. They have to be on a track. They have to follow a very strict path to get to where they need to go. And what do you think about that, Lonnie? The serendipity part.
Well, I think when we start out in our educational path, and certainly when I went to Ohio State from West Virginia, I went there to study cold geology because I was looking to get an education to get a job. And it was only because I had an opportunity to take a research position in what was then the Institute of Polar Studies. And that the idea at that time that I could even make a living looking at ice. So it covered 10% of the planet. It was, how are you going to do that? It was a research position, which meant I could get my degree faster and I could get out and get a job. So I took it. But once I had a trip to Antarctica and I saw how much ice there really is on this planet, then I started to think, well, maybe there's a thing here. And I think that, for young people, I think there's a lot of serendipity in life. You shouldn't make up your mind where you want to go until you have had an opportunity to be exposed to all the variables that are out there. And I think they're all kind of opportunities, and certainly when I look back on Kelkaya, I mean there were no agencies, there was no funding agencies to fund anything if it wasn't in Antarctica or Greenland. And our first mission there, $7,000 left over in the program's budget. They're all real science, and what could you do with $7,000 on that tropical glacier? And I could get there, and so we did. And so it, and there was no way. Certainly the ice cap itself was just amazing to find such an ice cap right above the Amazon basin in the tropics. You just don't. They don't go together, and yet at 19,000 feet, 2-day journey from the end of the nearest road. How in the world are you going to drill it? How are you going to get a drill up there? How are you going to get the ice cores out? So there was a lot of trying to figure out how you could do it. And I must say that without really great teams of people that I've had to work with over the years, it couldn't be done. And I've been very fortunate to have such dedicated field team members who, they see the importance of what we're trying to do, and they buy into that, and they make it happen. And so it takes a team, and our projects are international to have any chance of solving climate warming and getting a handle on our greenhouse emissions. We have to be able to work across borders and be able to communicate with people who don't think like we do. And one of the beauties of our programs, for example, working in the Western Kunlun's in far Western China, we had 60 people on that expedition. And those people came from Russia, they came from China, they came from the US, they came from South America, they were Tibetans. And yes, we don't all think alike, we don't all believe in the same things, but we still can focus on an objective, work together, and accomplish that objective. And that's what's going to happen when we deal with climate change. It's, you know, we have to get above. We have to realize this is a problem we all face, and we can only solve it by working together. And so that's one of the things that is very clear to me. And having worked in 16 different countries and worked with indigenous people, there are far more good people trying to do the right thing out there. And we just need to give them a voice. And I think we can change our future.
I can't think of a better spot to stop our conversation here, and perhaps we can reconvene. Lonnie, maybe when you're back from Peru or at some point. There's so many more threads here to explore. But what I'd love to do is have people see the movie, which is premiering in theaters around the country.
So right now we have a theatrical run, and so September 20th of this year, 2023, it'll be in 140 screens across the country, which when we first started figuring this out, we were told 25 screens would be a dream for a documentary film. And we were just so excited for that. And, as of last week, it was 70 screens. As of today, it's 140 screens on September 20th. And that's a one-time night, on September 20th. If sales go well, it'll continue to open up in theaters. And then in Los Angeles, New York, and Columbus, where Ellen is right now, it'll be played for an entire week. And because there's enough, conceived demand and energy around this film. So September 20th is the day, and on the site that you're saying now, canary.oscilloscope.net, is where you can find the screen nearest you. Beyond that, we will see. It'll at some point it'll be available online, and then in other continents, other countries. This film was filmed to be shown on the big screen. So if you have the opportunity to do it, some of the cinematography from our DP, Devin Whetstone, is absolutely spectacular. And when you see it on the big screen, it gives you the little chills in the back of your neck. We're excited. We'll be at a bunch of the screenings doing Q&As. I know Lonnie and Ellen will be doing a bunch as well. And we're just excited to share this film. I mean, I think Lonnie and Ellen have pushed the frontiers of science and our understanding of this planet. And I think with this collaboration, are pushing the frontiers of how science communication can happen. And, by opening up and being so available to tell us their story and their emotions and what happened and struggles, this is something that we need more of. And I'm so humbled to have gotten to know them so well, and just excited to share this movie with everyone.
Well, I'm excited to have had this conversation with all of you. Lonnie, you're muted. Hold on a second. Lonnie, you're now unmuted. I think you were going to say one last thing.
I have to say there's a tremendous interest in this film here in Peru. So we have to have some screenings down here for the locals, because, this is very important for them. And as a result of the research we've done here, the government has made Calcaya a climate hiking place and a geopark. And they're trying to preserve it because they're also around this ice cap, uranium and lithium deposits. And those mineral rights belong to a company in Canada. And so there's the local indigenous people who want to keep this environment that they have and keep it pristine like it is. And yet there's these outside interests in this area. And so we're actually playing a role here in trying to preserve this, to keep it in its natural form as we found it almost 50 years ago.
Fantastic. Well, again, thank you, Lonnie Thompson. Thank you, Ellen Mosley-Thompson. It's been a privilege to have reported on aspects of your journey myself through the 3-4 decades I've been on this beat. And it's just super exciting to see how beautifully this film has captured that journey, and could very well elicit a new generations of folks to push the limits whether they're pursuing energy innovation, regulatory innovation, or more science showing us the state of our changing planet. This is Andy Revkin, my Sustain What webcast. Find this film and lobby, make sure to generate the buzz that will help to push it from these screens to more screens, large and small. Thanks all of you for being here.